Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. And we are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey there, you Porcupine you. Welcome to episode 20 of the Porcupine Report. I am, as always, your host, your renegade statesman, executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Glad to be here with you this evening. We're going to have a great show, but first, I want to tell you, we are right now, this week, it's the final week. We are preparing for what I've been telling you about, the Porcupine Freedom Festival. It's coming right up. June 17th through the 23rd at Rogers Campground in Lancaster, New Hampshire. We are running out of time. If you've been just like waiting, been thinking about it, you're like, maybe I should get a ticket. Maybe, yeah, now's the last chance. Like by the time we get to the next episode, we're going to be right in the thick of the Porcupine Freedom Festival. So be sure to get your ticket. This is a family-friendly freedom festival. We're going to have Ron Paul personally addressing the festival. He's going to be on a giant, massive telescreen we're going to have at the pavilion there, but he's going to be live talking with us and even taking questions from folks there. But of course, that's not all. We're going to have Spike Cohen, Jack Hunter, Gene Epstein, Jeffrey Tucker, James Bovard, David Friedman, and so many more, including our guests that we're going to be hearing from in a little bit, Martha Bueno. So many great libertarians, 2,000 of your favorite libertarians. This is not to be missed. So bring your friends, bring your family, and reserve your campsite while supplies last. Grab your tickets at porcfest.com. That's pork with a C, not a K. You know what it is, before they sell out and before your time runs out. And I will say, if you can't physically attend, we do have another option. I've been waiting on telling you about it because I don't want to discourage anyone from getting the full PorcFest experience. So we did just announce that for $29, you can, at porcfest.com, under the ticket section, you can register for $29 to get access to a live stream of the main stage speakers throughout the course of PorcFest. So look, let's say you are stuck in the statist hellhole of California and it's just too much to travel on short notice all the way to New Hampshire. I understand, but that doesn't mean that you have to miss out on so many of these great speakers, including Dr. Ron Paul. For $29, you can catch the live stream. So that is another option available for you. It's not the full PorcFest experience, of course. The best thing is to come in person. I mean, after all, we're going to be doing a mock legislature with teens at PorcFest. Spike Cohen is going to be the governor. He's going to swear them into office, decide whether to veto their bill or not. I'm going to be ushering them through the process. There's so many fun activities happening at PorcFest that you're just going to miss out if you're not physically there. But that option is available to you at porcfest.com. So get your ticket or sign up for the live stream if you really can't make it. All right. That's PorcFest. Today, our guest today is someone who I'm looking forward to a chat with. We met for, I think, the very first time in person recently at the Libertarian Party National Convention, though I think we've interacted a few times on X, the website formerly known as Twitter. But it was great to meet her and to get a sense of her real hardcore activism that she's been doing in the liberty movement, particularly fighting for the freedom of one of our heroes, one of our hostages being held by the federal government, Ross Ulbricht. I remember at the LP National Convention, Martha Bueno, when it was time for Donald Trump was addressing the convention, and this was a big, obviously, there were a lot of mixed feelings about Donald Trump addressing the LP National Convention, but Martha was on a mission, and she brought all of these free Ross signs and made sure one was in the hands of every single person there, to raise up these free Ross signs so that Donald Trump would know that this is what we want. We want our hostage released. We want the federal government to free this very bright, intelligent young man who's been held for now over a decade for the crime of building a website. And we're going to talk more about that with Martha as she joins us on the show. Martha, welcome to the Porcupine Report.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, well, it's a real pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting you for the first time down in the swamp in Washington, D.C.
You're not kidding. It really was a swamp.
Well, I know I'm going to want to ask you about your experience there, but first of all, just so that people kind of can get to know you a little bit more, everyone has a particular path where they came to the liberty movement. What was your path? How did you get involved in the fight for liberty in America?
In America. So everybody does have a path. And I say that nobody's born into freedom. Like we kind of have to stumble into it. So my parents are Cuban. And they escaped Cuban communism. And then my father moved to Venezuela. My parents moved to Venezuela to start a company there. And communism found us there too. And we had to escape. So twice in my parents' short lifetime, they've had to escape communism. And, that's kind of how I figured this thing out. And then here in the States, I didn't know there was a Libertarian Party until sometime around 2001, where my uncle's like, "You sound like a libertarian." I was like, "A libertarian? What is that?" I thought I was a Republican because my parents were Republicans and everything I knew was Republican Party. And so I found the Libertarian Party. I was like, my people, these are my people. These are the people that believe the same things I believe in. And so that's kind of how I got acquainted with them. It wasn't until about 2016 that I actively got really, really involved with the craziness that is the Libertarian Party. But I think you can be very libertarian without being necessarily part of the party. There's a little bit of everything. You could just be a freedom fighter. And I think that the freedom movement is bigger than the party itself.
That's certainly how I've always viewed it. I've never been a registered libertarian myself, but I certainly view my friends in the Libertarian Party as fellow travelers in a movement that's much bigger than one party, whether you're advancing it through the Republican Party or the LP, or you just stay away from politics completely and you're like building homeschool networks or doing agorism. I mean, we're all kind of part of the same team. At least that's how I see it. Some people disagree. Some people are perhaps more partisan than I am.
That's how I see it too. And I don't want to leave out my Greens and Democrats too, because I think that there's a lot of liberty-minded people on all sides of the spectrum. I mean, we have tons of, believe it or not, like socialist and communist type within the Libertarian Party, because you can have those communities, just not without the force, which is the part that the government provides. So I don't understand them. Don't get me wrong. I don't understand how you could be a socialist, a libertarian socialist, but we have them, and I don't want to leave them out because they're also looking for freedom to do their socialist commie things.
I don't have any problem with people like. I think there's something to be said for like communism on like a small scale, voluntary. If people want to live in a commune and share everything, like, hey, on a small scale, with like a couple dozen people, maybe that works. I've always seen the problem is when you start to scale it up and you want it like on a statewide or a national level, and you want to use violence and force to compel people into it who don't want to be a part of it. So I don't know. I guess some more kind of left wing, kind of more socialist, communist libertarians, hey, as long as they're not trying to force other people into it, that's fine. And hey, maybe that injection of kind of the liberty element into it, if they all wanted to go to Vermont and participate with kind of the socialists, communists out there, and like maybe make them a little bit less status, maybe they could have a good influence there. I think we have a slightly different brand of libertarianism in New Hampshire in the Free State movement, but of course, everyone who loves liberty is welcome. But you
hit on the point. I mean, it's just the coercion part of it. You can be as socialist, as communist as you want without the government coercion. And that really doesn't affect me because then I have the freedom to not live the way you do. So that is actually the big point and the big differentiator, right? Is the government's monopoly on violence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's aggression that kind of sours everything. So now you said you've been involved with kind of the liberty movement in Florida primarily since 2016. But you seem to lately you've been really involved with the Free Ross movement. Could you tell our audience a little bit more about Ross Ulbricht and how did you get involved with the effort to see him freed from the
Free.
clutches of the federal government.
Oh boy. So yeah, I love the Ross story because Ross could be any one of us. And I say that quite literally because the judge on his case, Judge Catherine Forrest, in her closing arguments, in her closing statement to Ross and why she was giving him this incredibly long sentence of double life sentences plus 40 years, so 240 years, she said that his libertarian beliefs are dangerous. And so she believed that the free market that he was trying to set up. So who is Ross Ulbricht? Let's start from the beginning. For those that don't know, Ross Ulbricht is the person who created the Silk Road. Many of your audience might remember the Silk Road because it was from 2010 to about 2012, 2013. It was a dark web website where you could buy or sell pretty much anything. And with that pretty much anything, I will say that Ross Ulbricht is a libertarian, and therefore there was nothing that could hurt people or take their stuff. So no stolen goods, no child pornography, no weapons, just very, like, you could buy and sell drugs,
Yeah.
which was what most people did. They could also buy and sell legal drugs. There was one of the number one things besides marijuana sold on that site was insulin. So there's a lot of misinformation that people, it's like, oh, well, he had murder for hire. No, there was never a case of murder for hire. And actually, the government couldn't prove that there was any murder for hire or anything of that sense on the website.
That is so commonly like one of the things that is, at least when I'm posting about Ross. So for example, like when Joe Biden came to my Senate district in Auburn, Maine last year, I gave his team a note asking him, my one thing I would ask of you, Mr. President, is to commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht. I never got any response from it, but I did post it and the media covered it. So I hopefully it helped kind of elevate the case a little bit. But one of the common responses I got from people was people online saying, well, this guy, one, he's a drug lord, and he tried to, assassinate people and what now I know a little bit of the background and the story there. And but how did this kind of this mythology around this murder for hire thing come about? Like what's the real story there?
So the real story, we'll have to ask Ross and the people involved in this, but the story, as far as I've heard it and I've seen it, is there were FBI agents that got embedded into the Silk Road in order to take it down, right? And so they gained access to the servers and to the chat logs. There was approximately 5 different people that had access to these chat logs that were using the moniker Dead Pirate Roberts, which was what Ross had set up. So 5 different people that are confirmed that had access to these chat logs. And then there was, these chat logs, which were, and, any of these people could have posted it and they're not confirmed, is where that supposed murder for hire was done. The only identified target of this, his last name is Green. I just forgot his first name. Sorry.
Yeah.
He's a supporter of Ross. He actually speaks out in favor of him. And he says that Ross had nothing to do with that it was the government agents that were doing it. So not only did they not use it in his trial, they never convicted him of anything along those lines. So he's not been convicted of attempting even to secure murder for hire. But even if he was, so I believe at the core that the government was never able to prove it. But beyond that, even if they were able to prove it, murder for hire that does not go through, there was no murder. If he would have attempted to do this, was 10 years. Ross is serving 240 years. So even if that was the case, this would still be a nothing burger. He's already served 11 years. He should be free. But the point is, the government was never able to prove it, and they actually dismissed it with prejudice, meaning they can't bring it back. So this is something of a narrative that I believe that the government put out there to bring down Ross. Because if you look at his case just on the facts, the way I think most libertarians who see this and realize the travesty of it, we see the other side of this. Okay, well, there's this website that sold pretty much anything on a true free market, but it used Bitcoin. So they claim that Ross money laundered. Well, how can he launder money if there was no money on this website? It was all Bitcoin. And sure, now we're looking at it from 2024 perspective, but you have to remember that in 2010, nobody could even buy Bitcoin. Really, it wasn't easy. You had to go to some exchange, Mount Gox, which was like a trading card company online where you could then mail in a check for Bitcoin and then they'd give you, I mean, it was just a disaster. And then you have to go to the dark web to purchase things on the Silk Road. So there were no victims. There's the government never produced a victim. They weren't able to claim that Ross is guilty of doing anything to anyone. And so again, I bring it back to the judge when she said that Ross's ideology is dangerous. Well, that spoke to me because I share Ross's ideology. And I think most of my fellow libertarians share Ross's ideology. So what that judge was saying is that our ideology of freedom, of free markets, of self-ownership is not only dangerous, but that they will throw us into a cage for believing this and for acting upon it. And that is where I have a big problem. So to answer your previous question, how did I get involved? I've known about Ross since the first time I read an article about the dark web, about the Silk Road. And at the time, I had never even smoked cannabis before. So I was not their target audience. I did not go onto the Silk Road. I did not purchase anything from the Silk Road, but I was like, wow, this guy's really cool. And he's onto something. And I was a fangirl from the day I read about him. And I had the great privilege and honor to meet his mother, Lynn Ulbricht, a few years back. And as a mother myself, I have 3 sons, and I know what it's like when you can raise your kids as best as you can, but you can't stop the brilliance of one of your children from going and building the most free market, the most like amazing libertarian thing, and then unfortunately getting caught, and then unfortunately giving double life sentence. So he will die in a prison cell if we can't do anything about it. And his mother is absolutely wonderful. She's a fighter. She's been fighting for the last 11 years to get her son out of jail. And she's a very young 70 something, but she is in her 70s. And I think that she needs all of us to rally around her and help her because, she needs to have her son free here soon.
Yeah, I've gotten to know Lynn over the years. I actually, when I was working at Young Americans for Liberty and doing a show with them down in Austin, Texas, where she's in the area, got to do a sit-down interview with her talking about, Ross as a kid and how precocious he was and smart he was. And it is kind of, I mean, it seems like it's a real shame, not just that someone like him is being incarcerated unjustly, but also someone like him with such a mind and such potential to contribute good things to the world, to have that mind kind of behind bars, rotting away. It's not just a crime against Ross; it's a crime against, I think, the world taking a
Absolutely.
really brilliant person
And he is truly brilliant. I like to equate him with, libertarians. We love the whole matrix thing. We love, the blue pill or the red pill. And Ross is our Neo. And I think that a lot of people, when they ask me why Ross, why is this one human being so important? Well, he saw things that we couldn't see. And he is the only person. I tend to call this like the most libertarian thing since 1776, because, our founding fathers wanted this free country where the government couldn't really affect us, right? It's the first place on planet Earth that we know of that the government didn't give us our rights. Our rights come from something else, come from something higher above. And this is the first time that we had a true free market where all of the currency used was untouched by the government. There was absolutely no taxes on this because the government couldn't even tax the money, much less the items. I think that Ross created something that is absolutely stunning and beautiful in what he was able to do. This young kid, he didn't really have, that ambition. He wasn't trying to be a kingpin. He wasn't trying to be like the world's leading drug dealer or anything. I mean, he just happened to be it because, it's like an eBay, but for
yeah,
everything.
yeah. And I think, as some have told me, more drugs are bought and sold on Facebook
Oh yeah.
than have ever been bought and sold on the Silk Road. So it's kind of like, why is Mark Zuckerberg not in jail facing a double life sentence plus 40 years?
Actually,
Why?
more children are sold on Facebook than pretty
Oh,
much anywhere else. Snapchat has the record for the most fentanyl sales. Actually, 6 months of Snapchat sales equals more than the entire time that the Silk Road was up, the years that Silk Road was up on fentanyl sales. Child trafficking on all of these sites, even on Twitter, on X, they have drug sales, they have all these things. And when they took down the Silk Road, over 200 companies popped up that do allow the things that the Silk Road didn't allow, including child trafficking. So again, the United States government is coming after Ross saying, you're this evil person. We have to make an example out of you. But literally the day after Ross was sentenced, hundreds of these stores popped up and they haven't done anything about it. And like you, I'm not advocating for Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all these guys to be in jail. But I do think that the huge discrepancy there is I don't want to call for their jailing. I want them all free, starting with Ross.
Do you have any thought as to why? Like, is it particularly like his libertarian ideology? Like, why they've gone so disproportionately and harshly after Ross versus other people who have done similar things? Who I think I've heard at one point that someone else got charged with similar crimes around building a website like this and got like 10 years in prison, right? Where Ross is getting 24 times that. You have any thoughts on, like, is it in particular that he's got this dangerous ideology, which is you're not supposed to hurt people and you're not supposed to take their stuff? And of course, that's what the government is in the business in. So they're especially threatened by it.
I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to say what I think that the government is scared of was Bitcoin.
Yeah.
They were scared of a currency that they can't manipulate, and a currency that they, in 2010, again, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, that time period, I think they were trying to stick the toothpaste back in the tube. And now that that's just not a possibility, now they're trying to regulate it with the KYC, know your customer. They're trying to turn it more into a banking type of situation where the Bitcoin people want the governments like on their side so that they don't end up in prison like Ross, because there are other people who have sold Bitcoin like Ian Friedman, like Aria, that are that sold Bitcoin and have spent time in jail.
Heroes
So,
of the Free State community who've
right.
been persecuted by the federal government in similar fashions.
Like Roger Ver. Yeah, all these great Bitcoin people who are being persecuted by the government. So when it's like, well, is it the drugs? No, it's not the drugs. And no, it's not his freedom. And no, it's not, like, I believe that the reason that Ross is behind that cage is personally the Bitcoin. Again, he was early to it. Bitcoin, other than Satoshi Nakamoto, who we don't know who he is, who is potentially the person behind or the figure behind or the enigma behind Bitcoin. The second most important person to Bitcoin is Ross, because he gave it its first use case. So why is he there? Bitcoin.
And I think I heard someone write recently the irony that Ross they confiscated all of his Bitcoin when they arrested him, and then the government sold his Bitcoin, which I think was the first time that the government was actively involved in the sale of Bitcoin, which seems to actually further establish Bitcoin as its legitimacy in some fashion.
Of course. Bitcoin is legitimate, and they also now understand that they need to develop their own coin, which is the CBDCs.
Yeah.
Which is what now, Aaron Day is very big promoting this, and I wasn't aware of how big CBDCs are for these governments. But over 134 governments around the world either have one ready to go or are in the process of having one ready to go. And this is the new front. This is our new 1984. This is how the government is going to control us. So Bitcoin, I think, and I'm pretty involved in that community as well. And there's like this big war amongst Bitcoiners with the block size and whatever. We won't get into any of that. I'm just talking on the top down view of Bitcoin, that, Bitcoin definitely has the potential to take the power from the government. If the government can't print and tax us into oblivion, then that's a big deal for the United States government. And somebody who would take that power from them, I think that's really why Ross is in that cage. And I think that that's why it was so huge what Trump said at the Libertarian National Convention. And I know that libertarians aren't happy with this, but if we happen to get Trump into office and he does pardon Ross, that is a huge win for all of us.
Yeah, so let's take a step back and let's talk about that. Well, first of all, I think that you're onto something. I very much do think if you fix the money, you fix the world, right? If you
Absolutely.
don't have these criminal cartels we call national governments in control of the money supply, then if no central authority controls the money and we have a real free marketplace in honest money, then I think a lot of the great evils of the world cannot be continued. But
Mhm.
of course, at the Libertarian National Convention, so we heard from many different candidates, right? When it comes to the subject of free Ross, I think it's clear that the Libertarian Party nominee Chase Oliver supports free Ross.
Mhm.
I'm told though I don't think it was specifically mentioned by him at the convention, that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Supports free Ross, and Donald Trump announced that he supports free Ross. So first of all, I think that's interesting. That means that the only person standing in the way of free Ross is Joe
Joe
Biden,
Biden.
right?
Right.
Any
And
one
Joe
of the
Biden can pardon him or commute a sentence today. So, in case
it'll
anybody
be
on the Joe Biden team is listening to this, hey, y'all, you could steal the votes by doing this today. Also, it's in line with the marijuana convictions that they're pretending that they are pardoning, which they are in fact not. But
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. They cleared some records, but they didn't actually release anyone from prison. So,
Oh, they
uh,
haven't even pardoned. And Kamala Harris is just like, we pardoned tens of thousands of people. No, you didn't. And here's the receipt. Here's the website. No, you didn't.
oh, okay. So all right. Well,
They pardoned 24 people and none of them for cannabis.
wow. Okay.
I
So
know.
all right. You know this even better than I do. All right.
Listen, I
But
make it a point to know these things. Okay. I hate hypocrisy.
well, but I guess it was pretty big, right? At his speech at the LP
Huge.
National Convention, Donald Trump announced that he would commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht. And it
Mhm.
should be noted that a commutation is different than a pardon. He would still have it on his record, but he would be basically, his punishment would be time served and then he'd be free.
Right.
And Donald Trump also promised in his speech to protect self custody of cryptocurrency and to block CBDCs.
He did,
Now, a lot
which
of
is
people,
huge.
yeah, and I frankly wonder a little bit going into that if he really knew what self custody was all about, or he knew what CBDCs were. I think Vivek Ramaswamy is talking some of these things to him. But I will say, obviously, one of the criticisms that I hear from a lot of folks in the liberty community who are very hostile to Donald Trump and are very skeptical of these claims say, well, he makes all kinds of promises. He's going to break these promises if he gets there. He's not going to follow through. Um, what do you say to that? Do you think that why are you confident that if Donald Trump were to get elected, that he says he's going to commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht on day one. Are you confident that he would actually follow through and do that?
I mean, he'd be silly not to, right? I mean, he could definitely win over so many people and just really piss off the DOJ. And people are like, "Well, he had 4 years before. Why didn't he do it?" First of all, he didn't promise anyone that he would. So let's just start there. It's like, well, it's not that he had this promise and he didn't keep it. He just
Yeah.
didn't promise anyone and didn't keep a promise that he never made. So I don't know. But yeah, I think that, you know, Donald Trump, a lot has happened in the last 4 years since he was president. And we're seeing right now, this man is under attack. He's seeing, he's getting it from every state pretty much. They're trying to get him off the ballot. They're trying to sue him into oblivion. They're trying to throw charges at him. I mean, recently, the charges about what he paid a porn star not to talk about their sexual relation. We had a president who bunked his intern who was 21 at the time and then lied about it to the like. And when really this is like, Trump is whatever the things that people claim he is. I'm sure he's all of that and more. He's a politician, right? We know plenty of politicians. This is kind of who they are. But he's been honest. He's been honest about his, sexual relationships with people. I mean, this isn't anything new. We've known this about him. So yeah, he paid money to a porn star. I don't see how this is anything to do,
Yeah,
you know.
I think that everyone I think that's already baked into everyone's understanding of Donald Trump, right? I don't think anyone is surprised by that. I don't think that
He's been
anyone.
married 3 times. He's cheated on every one of his wives. I mean, if you wanted somebody who was a family man, none of them are. Who's a family man?
Yeah,
Which
well,
one of these guys is like, I've never cheated on my wife. And like none of them.
and I know I kind of have the perspective that, at that level, whoever you vote for, at least if you're voting for a major party nominee, you're likely voting for someone who is a monster in one way, shape, or form.
Or form,
Whether they're
right.
better at hiding it or not, they tend to be people. They're all people who have presided over wars and are somehow able to go to sleep at night knowing that they've ordered the deaths of like hundreds of thousands of people. So
And Trump is no different, unfortunately,
yeah,
there. He has also ordered the death of people. And I just want to make it clear that I am not a Trump, like rah, rah, everything Trump does is wonderful. I will still call him out on his things. So, I get a lot of pushback from libertarians that are like, you love Trump. No, that's not it. I just understand where we are in the world at this
yeah,
time. And as libertarians, we don't hold any power. Even if Chase happened to get into office, we don't hold the Senate. We don't hold the House. We don't have any Supreme Court justices. So this isn't we're just going to win the nomination. We're just going to, win at the White House and everything's going to be kumbaya and we're going to live in a libertarian society. My point to libertarians is let's move the needle where we can.
yeah.
And so Donald Trump made us a promise and he said, if you guys get me into office, you will have a seat at the table, which is more than anybody else has ever promised a libertarian. And I think that
Yeah.
that's a good argument for libertarians. Again, the argument is never going to be he's our perfect guy and we love him and he's so libertarian, although he did call himself a libertarian, which was pretty big because as a long-term libertarian, I've been listening to people call us weird and crazy and, all those words, all those choice words we've been listening for so long. So
I saw a chart going around recently. There's like the pipeline of like someone going from a liberal to a conservative to a libertarian. That's right. It's like
to an anarchist.
yeah, or it's like a conservative who gets their accosted by the police becomes a libertarian, right? And certainly I think for Donald Trump, he's been experiencing that a little bit. I certainly wouldn't call him a libertarian. He can call himself what he wants. I certainly perhaps think there's a possibility he's more libertarian now than he was when he first got going, because he's certainly experienced the depths to which the deep state will go after him, and that can engender some libertarian sympathies. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, spending a lot of time in a courtroom can definitely change you, and I think it has. I mean, at least I want to believe it. But also something else that he said that I think libertarians might have glossed over is he said he would end the Department of Education. And that is kind of a big deal for us too. So I mean, again, call me crazy libertarians, but he's offering us all these things that we couldn't do on our own. So I am making the case for a reason to vote for Donald Trump. Again, Biden could just knock that out of us right now by releasing Ross. We know he won't, but
if he was smart, he would, right? Then he would stop. I think that the danger to Joe Biden politically is right now, kind of the anti-Biden vote has not consolidated, right? You've got Bobby Kennedy, you've got Donald Trump, you've got Chase Oliver, you've got three different candidates for people who want to free Ross and see some want to see things shift somewhat in perhaps a libertarian direction. There's three different potential candidates people could vote for. But if people were to consolidate around Donald Trump, for example, because they saw him as the most viable path to getting some of these things done, that he would be the most likely to defeat Joe Biden, at least maybe people come to different conclusions on their political analysis there. That would be a real danger to Joe Biden. And maybe at that point he could say, all right, let's stop this consolidation. Let's just free the hostage now and not have this happen. But I will say, it's something that you were saying before, right? And I think that sometimes as libertarians, we get really caught up in who we vote for these offices as wanting them to be like the avatar of all of our ideological beliefs and everything we believe. We want to, right? It's almost like this sacrament of like of our libertarian ideology. Like, we've got to vote for the pure libertarian, the person who's the pure manifestation of everything that we believe. And if you vote for anything else, you're not a real libertarian. I've come to see it a little bit differently. I always think about, I always go back to something that Morton Blackwell, who founded the Leadership Institute, talks about. He says, if you want to change the, if you want to get particular policies passed, right, there's one of two paths we can try to accomplish this by. We can try to get all of the right people elected who believe all of the correct things, because in their heart of hearts, they know that it's the right thing to do what we want them to do, right? And they're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. Or you can shape the political environment around the wrong people to make it politically expedient for them to do the right thing. Now, Donald Trump is someone who I look at as, he's a very self-interested, I would say, selfish person. But you know what? Pretty much all
A bit of a
politicians are.
narcissist.
There's very rare is the Ron Paul who is like really in it for like a cause higher than themselves. And Donald Trump certainly is, he's a bit of a narcissist. He's self-interested, but also like that self-interest is something that you can bank on. And if he needs particular political coalitions in order to kind of get elected, then that gives those of us who are in these political coalitions real leverage and real power to shape the political environment around him to get the things that we want done.
It's the Ross Perot effect.
Right. He needs us, and there are things that we need from him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether what he has offered to libertarians is enough to say it's worth voting for him, I'll leave that to other people to decide. Personally, speaking just on behalf of myself, and again, I always want to reiterate it whenever we're talking about politics on this show, that the Free State Project is a 501c3 organization. We don't endorse any candidates. All I can do is give my personal views. And I do think it is intriguing, right? The offer to commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht, the offer to put a libertarian in his cabinet. I'd like to know a little bit more what that looks like. Is he talking, if a libertarian...
Maybe one, maybe two. He did talk about putting Rick Grinnell in his cabinet, who he claims is libertarian. I would agree with that. I think Rick Grinnell is pretty libertarian-ish.
Okay.
But maybe a few others. I'd love to see Angela McArdle working with him. I'd love to see maybe the chair of the Libertarian Party. She did work with him to bring him to the stage. So I would like to see more of that, unity amongst the two parties, because ultimately, regardless of what side you're on, I do think that there is some things that we can agree with people on the right. And there's things that we can agree with people on the left. Again, with the left, maybe they're more in line with drugs being legal. We could work with them on those issues. On the right, maybe it is, things like ending the Department of Education with Donald Trump. Let's work on those bridges that unite us versus constantly being in people's faces, because they're not the perfect libertarian, because nobody's going to ever be the perfect libertarian. I get told at least once a day that I'm not a real libertarian, and that's okay, because I want to be effective. And I think that the real libertarian sometimes can't be effective, because if you're standing on your principles and you don't talk to other people, you don't work with other people, you're just never going to be effective. And so, sometimes you just have to compromise, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I'll say this too. I think that, Trump, the times that Trump was worst was when he was influenced by the neoconservatives in his orbit, who should, we can all blame him for putting those neoconservatives in his orbit in the first place. But certainly, I think he must have, hopefully, if he's got two brain cells to rub together, he recognizes that he's been stabbed in the back repeatedly by these guys, right? And I think that presents an opportunity, because as I see in the Republican Party, there are three primary ideological coalitions that are vying for the future of the Republican Party and control of that infrastructure. And that's the neoconservatives, it's the America First MAGA Republicans, and it's the Ron Paul Liberty Republicans. And I don't think that either one of them has is big enough to dominate the party by themselves. And so Donald Trump is in an interesting position where he's coming to the libertarians and saying, I want you in my coalition. I want you in my cabinet. I want you at the table. And that makes me think, hopefully that means libertarians are replacing seats at the table that neoconservatives have occupied, because I'd love to push them away from the table.
Me too.
And I
We
think
have a
that
common enemy with those Republicans, those America First, those, Ron Paul Republicans. Libertarians, we have that in common. We also don't want to see the wars keep going. So yeah, we can unite with Republicans. I think that it's very doable. It would be the right thing to do.
Well, let me ask you, because I hear some people express concern. Well, what if libertarians kind of got in bed with kind of the Donald Trump MAGA movement? Are libertarians going to lose their principles? Are they going to lose their identity? Are they just going to become cheerleaders for Donald Trump? And when he's like, I don't know, if he decides to start a war, are we just going to say nothing and say, well, that's our guy. We're gonna just sit down and take it? Like, I guess I do wonder. It does seem to be a legitimate concern to some degree that, when you start to form coalitions with people, sometimes people do go native and they start to lose sight of what's really important. What do you say
And
to
that's
that?
why you have people like us here to be like, no, that's not cool. Because I agree. And I think that happens often. You see it in the Republican Party. Somebody might start out a little bit like, no, that's not cool. We don't want to do that. And then, as you gain those positions of power, you're like, oh, well, I don't want to lose it. So yes, it's always a concern. I would be lying if I was like, that would never happen to libertarians. But I think unlike both other parties, we actually have morals and principles that we stand on and we discuss on a regular basis. I will often ask Republicans and Democrats, what brought you into this party? And generally, they can't make an argument for their party that isn't about the other guy,
Yeah.
and you could do that in either case. It's like, well, why are you voting for Donald Trump? Well, because Biden, blah, 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 blah. Or why are you voting for Biden? Well, because Trump. No, tell me about your values. Tell me about what
Yeah.
you believe. And they can't do that. Whereas libertarians, we can rattle off tons of things. So I think
Yeah,
it's a
we'll
little
annoy you to
hard.
death telling you all the things that we believe.
Oh
We
yeah. Oh
won't
yeah.
shut up about it.
We won't. We'll be like, oh my God. And did you hear about this and that and the other thing? So we have these core beliefs. And I think that that is the underlying difference between libertarians and every other um, group out there, political group out there. Maybe not the Greens. I think they're pretty solid in what they believe as well. They're completely wrong about it, but nonetheless, I think they know what they want.
You know, it,
You know.
it usually, I mean, I think this is the interesting things about like third parties, right? It's like if you're in a third party, you usually have like a good ideological reason for being there because you're not winning.
Right,
um,
exactly. There's got to
right,
be something that calls you into it, and it's
right.
not the wins.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the exception to that is like the Forward Party, which I don't know what they believe. It's like they're
They
like
don't believe in anything.
we're the moderates, right? We want common
No,
sense.
the
We want
forward
that.
party is about advancing issues, single issues, which I think
Oh,
is
yeah.
is actually quite smart. Yeah.
Okay. What are their single issues? I guess I don't know.
I don't think they've gotten very far, but it's basically about candidates who can move a particular. I think one of the first things that they wanted was voting, was about changing the voting rules so that we were first past the post, or I'm not sure. I didn't
Okay.
get really involved into it, but yeah,
I,
I think they have like that belief that they can, we can have a different type of voting system, and that's kind of where they are. Which, we need all of these things. We don't have in this country of 330 million people. When Donald Trump and Joe Biden were going round two on these men, um, think that we've lost the plot altogether. We're at a point where freedom is the last thing that we're voting for. We're voting for two 80-year-old men who
yeah.
should be at home retiring and living their best life. And this is what we have in this country. I wouldn't have them running a large corporation, much less the largest corporation on planet Earth, which is the United States government. But
Well,
here,
I guess probably the good thing is no matter what, this is probably the last time we'll be voting for. The either one of them will be on the ballot, and so I think this election is an interesting question, not just about who does the country go with for the next 4 years, but what are we setting up for what comes next?
which
And
is another great point to libertarians. There
yeah,
is no successor to Donald Trump. So if we do get Donald Trump into the White House for the next 4 years, he's termed out beyond the point that he's, of course, of an age that we don't think he would be able to do anything else. Who is going to be his next successor? And I think that if we can, over the course of 4 years, push towards more liberty, we might have a space. There might be a universe where somebody like a Dave Smith or a Spike Cohen or other libertarian that we really, really, really like has a bigger influence and a bigger platform on which to stand on. And that is the
Yeah.
big core belief behind why I think that it's okay to vote for Donald Trump if, that's how you feel.
And Vivek made this argument, I think, in an interesting way at the convention, right? He argued that, said the future of the America First movement is yet to be written. What is the next chapter of that after Donald Trump? And I will say, you know, um, having been involved in the Republican Party of Maine for the last decade, I will tell you that one of the things that's, I think, unique about like the right wing in America and the conservative movement in America versus conservative movements in perhaps other countries like European countries, right, is that the traditions that we can appeal to as what we need to conserve are libertarian traditions, right? The Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution. I think the Tea Party was probably the best embodiment of this intersection between the conservative and the liberty movements. Of course, the conservative movement under MAGA has gotten worse on some things, but also gotten a lot better on foreign policy in terms of not wanting to kind of be in all these globalist wars. And there is a real opportunity. I think Vivek makes a compelling case. There's an opportunity if libertarians were to be a part of that conversation, that libertarians can be a part of writing the next chapter of where that movement goes and making it a more libertarian movement and not letting it be co-opted by neoconservatives like the Tea Party was.
Absolutely. And
So
that has to come from a decentralized movement. I mean, we see it playing out now, even though we don't have a seat at the table. Look at people like a Dave Smith who goes on these national platforms like Joe Rogan, or just recently on the Patrick Bet David program, and
he did great
debated
on that.
Cuomo over. Yes, he did a fantastic job. And so every time I see him on, Joe Rogan, I'm like, he's doing a fantastic job at educating people as to why these wars are wrong and the history behind them. So we don't even have to win office to already have those wins. And all of those wins are ours. Yes, you and I aren't Dave Smith, but his wins are our wins. He's pushing forward the things that we care about and is educating people on, for example, ending these wars, these forever wars, and how the United States has played a part in our own demise that we're starting to see, and are in the reason why people dislike us and the reason why we have terrorism. And I think that that's really important. I'm certainly not going to make the case that America is all evil, but I can't also make the case that America has never done anything wrong when clearly we have. And so I think that the conversation, because we're able to have these open and honest conversations on platforms like X and elsewhere, or Rumble or whatever, we are starting to see people actually care about these topics. So it's changing. The dynamic of the world is changing. We're able to communicate better amongst ourselves. We don't know what it's going to look like, but definitely having a seat at the table is going to be good for us. I don't think anybody can disagree with that point.
So Martha, you're going to be at the Porcupine Freedom Festival next week.
I
You're going to be
will be.
speaking there. What are you looking forward to at PorcFest?
Oh man, this is my second Pork Fest. And last year I went in not knowing what to expect, and I fell in love with it. And I am not the camping type of person, which is why I hadn't gone before. But it turns out you don't have to camp. Oh my God, it's the greatest thing ever. So yeah, I really love the community. I have to say that what I left there with the best sense of like recharged batteries, and just like, these are my people. These are my people. And I just love going and like meeting everybody that we can there and hanging out with old friends. And it's awesome. A whole community of liberty minded people with their children, by the way, that are also liberty minded. I mean, okay, yes, my favorite part is seeing the kids like doing things. And that's either selling things or making things or talking about liberty things. And I also saw kids metalworking, which I thought was like amazing. So all of the above.
The family activities really have grown over the years, and I think it's a function of this festival that started off as a lot of libertarians just like looking to have a party, but eventually people grow up, they start having families, they're bringing their kids, and Pork Fest has evolved and grown with the people who with the community. And so it's I know I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to having you there. And I'm going to give you the last word. Any final words you want to share with folks before we wrap up?
Well, for anybody who's considering going to PorcFest, please do. Just come. It's awesome. Yeah, I heard you. You could pay to get the live stream, but really it's the community. So everybody should come. And then if you want to find out more about Ross, or if you haven't signed the petition, you can find out more about Ross at freeross.org, freeross.org, and then /petition if you want to sign it. We are almost at 600,000. It would be a dream to get it to 1 million. So that it is one of the largest petitions that change.org has ever had. That would be fantastic. Also, I believe the White House has to take up an issue if it reaches 1 million. So let's go.
Let's do it.
Thank you,
Martha. Thank you for your advocacy. Looking forward to seeing you next week.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. That's the show. Before we wrap up, though, I want to tell you, of course, I want to see you at the Porcupine Freedom Festival. I hope that you're getting your ticket and you're coming out, you're joining us. Short of that, you can check out the live stream. But I also want to mention to you another festival that's coming up that the Free State Project is going to have a presence at, and that is Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, taking place this July 10th through the 13th. Look, we're actually the Free State Project is going to be on the main stage there, presenting about what we're doing in New Hampshire and making the pitch for people who love freedom to come and join us in the Free State. But that's not all. There's going to be so many great speakers. I'm told that the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, is going to be speaking at Freedom Fest. So if you find yourself in Las Vegas or that area, July 10th through the 13th, be sure to come out to Freedom Fest and come see us there. And just for supporters of the Free State Project and this show, you can use the code FSP50 and you can get $50 off your the current attendee price of your ticket for Freedom Fest. And that's at freedomfest.com. So use the discount code FSP50, save 50 smackers, and I will see you there in Vegas. But of course, that'll be after I see you next week in Lancaster for the Porcupine Freedom Festival. All right, everyone, that's the show. Thank you so much, as always, to our producer, Renita, for running everything behind the scenes. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.